As of today, July 19th, 2026, I'm a former libertarian. I'm a former anarchist. I'm finally, at the age of 33, I am now a statist. And if you don't know me, this probably isn't a big deal, because why would it be? Most people are statists. But I've had a shift in myself, and I've made a couple videos already. I haven't released them, but the shift is in my values, and specifically the hierarchy of values. And I think for a really long time, I prioritized truth above all other things, including well-being and including relationships with those around me, and including feeling connected to my community and the people around me. And that might not sound like a bad thing, because truth is really important a lot of the times, and it shouldn't be something where you don't care about truth at all. I think that would be a pretty bleak world. In the other videos I made, I guess I can just recap. To me, what separates libertarians from non-libertarians is the origin of political authority. For non-libertarians, political authority is achieved through consensus, I guess. It's hard for me to even speak in non-libertarian terms, because I've been thinking for so long in terms of the state and the monopoly on violence and might makes right and coercion, and basically the state as this entity that picks which people have certain rights and which everybody else doesn't have those rights. To a non-libertarian person, or to a statist, the state's legitimacy is assumed, and therefore what the state is and what it does is it crafts reality. The state is a means by which the entire world is shaped, and our experience of the world is shaped. To a libertarian, the state is inherently illegitimate. A libertarian will observe that there are other people, there's billions of people in the world, but we each are individual organisms as well. And the libertarian will assert something like, every individual has a right to their own body. Every individual has a right to decide what's best for them. Every individual has a right to benefit from the fruits of their labor. What libertarians will sort of build up from this is negative liberties or negative rights. And a negative right is just something where it's not creating an obligation for any other person. It's just saying every individual has a right not to be interfered with. Every individual has a right not to be conscripted into an army. Every individual has a right not to be forced to labor. One of these rights, or one of these ideas in particular, is called the non-aggression principle. And the non-aggression principle states an individual may do really whatever they want as long as it doesn't aggress upon another person. So you can't kidnap somebody, you can't point a gun at them and threaten them and force them to do things. You can't trap them on your property. You can't compel them to do things that they don't want to do. It's just sort of an axiomatic foundation from which the rest of libertarianism is built. So you have this foundation of negative liberties. The individual person has a right not to be messed with, essentially. And when you follow all of those cascading flows down to their logical conclusion, what you get is that what the state is a group of people who use overt force or implied threats of force to force everybody else that they have territorial dominion over to do what they want. So a great example is taxation. I know that the reason I pay taxes isn't because I want to. I pay taxes because I know that if I don't, eventually I'll go to jail. And between here and jail, it'll probably be a lot of pain and suffering, losing what little money I do have, losing what few assets I do have, and going to court, just a lot of like inconvenient shit. So the reason I pay taxes is because I know if I don't, men with guns are going to come and take me to jail. In so many steps. There might be a lot of paperwork between here and there, but that's sort of the simplified thing. What else is compelled? Yeah, I mean, when I was 18, I had to register for the draft in order to get any financial aid for college. Now, for me personally, it turns out not to have been an issue because I voluntarily enlisted in the military a month before I turned 19. So at that point, I was a libertarian leaning, but I was not an anarcho-capitalist at that time. I didn't become an ANCAP until, ironically, I was about 2 years into the Army. I was 20, about to turn 21, when I started really reading Murray Rothbard pretty seriously, and particularly his essay, Anatomy of the State. Now, even as a libertarian, I understood that taxes often do pay for useful things like roads and police and fire department, things that are useful and functional and make sense to have in society. However, a libertarian would say that just because there are goods that are provided and funded by those taxes doesn't mean that the threat of violence goes away, and it doesn't mean that the initial act or the ongoing act of threatened violence and threatened imprisonment, that doesn't mean that that suddenly goes away. And so when you hear a libertarian claim that taxation is theft, that's why they say that. It has nothing to do really with the actual consequences of the taxation in terms of outcomes and what happens with the tax money and how well it's stewarded. Now, obviously, some tax dollars are much better spent than others, and some are frankly wasted, which enrages people more, and voters become even more disengaged and disenfranchised because they see how corrupt the system is and also understand how helpless they are to really resist it. Libertarianism is really concerned with logical coherence as a system, and for example, in Ancapistan, in anarcho-capitalist utopia, there would not be a class of people who have the right or the moral authority to use violence to compel other people to do things against their will. This is not to say that violence would not occur. This is not to say that threats and compulsion and coercion would not occur, but merely that there would not be a class of people who got to do these things with sort of moral impunity and with like a mandate from heaven almost, or even consensus-based sovereignty or something. The way I'm wired, making this personal, for whatever reason, maybe it's my personality, maybe it's my upbringing, for a very long time, my hierarchy of values had truth at the top. And so when I was 19, 20, 21, and I was reading Murray Rothbard and Ron Paul, and I was listening to Tom Wood's podcast, and I was reading articles on Mises.org and Lou Rockwell, I found the argument so compelling because I couldn't refute their truth claims. I couldn't get around the fact that, hey, you know what? Taxation is theft. And we have to be honest about the violence and the coercion that oils the machine that keeps the system running. And we can't just pretend all of that violence and coercion is legitimate just because the people running it give us kickbacks, like police and fire and roads. That doesn't actually solve the problem of political authority. If you are someone who may very well like truth and value it, but truth is not the absolute pinnacle of your hierarchy of values, your experience of politics is probably quite different than mine. And I am not making any value judgments here. I'm not saying one hierarchy of values is better than another hierarchy of values, but I suspect that if you are not a libertarian and never were, you probably valued connection to your community, you probably valued social cohesion, and you probably valued positive rights a lot more, or a lot higher, I guess, than epistemological rigor, let's say. So your politics, I'm thinking of when I first started getting interested in politics when I was maybe 13 years old, 14 years old, something like that. I already had the seeds of libertarianism planted in me. And maybe that wasn't even from an external influence. It very well could have been that I valued epistemology and I valued truthiness so much over connection to my community, social cohesion, practicality. I valued it so much over those things that perhaps in a sense I was destined to become a libertarian. But I imagine if you are not a libertarian and you never were, your view of the state is probably more top down, and your conception of metaphysics and ontology and ethics probably isn't starting at the individual atomized unit of the single person, but perhaps you viewed the state aspirationally. Perhaps you thought the government exists, it has legitimacy, and it is the mechanism by which reality is crafted. I want to live in a world where there are good things, where society as a whole is healthy, and society as a whole serves everybody, from the top people all the way down to the most vulnerable, poorest people, the most at-risk people. And so I want to live in a world with robust civil rights. I want to live in a world with good health care and good health outcomes for people. I want to live in a world with a strong economy, good jobs for people, work that has dignity. I want to live in a world with people feel really engaged in their communities and they feel empowered to speak up and have their voices be heard and change the things that need changing. So I'm calling that aspirational politics because you're aspiring for a better world and you see that this entity, this institution of the state exists, and you think the state ought to be the mechanism by which that better world is achieved. I think this is a great thing, personally. I'm pretty much there now. I still speak of the state in the old language I have for a long time, but my hierarchy of values has shifted, and I am subordinating epistemology and truthiness to a better world, connection with my community, and I guess the optimism that comes with feeling that the world we ought to live in is possible and we have the tool to do it. If you have always viewed the state as inherently legitimate and you've always had those sort of aspirations of a better world, it may have been perfectly obvious to you from a very young age, from 11, 12, 13 years old. It might have been perfectly obvious to you that the state is simply the means by which we should achieve that better world. And to you, I say congratulations. You've probably avoided a lot of unnecessary suffering, and you've avoided a lot of personal strife and confusion and friction in personal relationships and disengagement and just disillusionment with how pervasive the state actually is. I'm stating that as fact, but now I'm not saying it as a pejorative thing or as like a lamentation. I'm just stating it more as like a plain fact. Like, the state does pervade much of our lives. Much of our human experience is steered by and influenced by law and policy and regulations and threats of imprisonment. To me now, at 33, it's a lot less problematic than I thought it was when I was, say, 23. So the actual reason I started recording this is because I had this title pop in my head called The Cost of Libertarianism. And when that popped into my head, I wanted to be a little systemic about it. I wanted to be general in my approach. But I think the only reason I can say the things that I'm saying now is because of what I've experienced personally. And so to me, I do think subscribing to the ideology of libertarianism, and in particular anarcho-capitalism, has been a detriment to my well-being and has caused a lot of suffering for me that most people who aren't anarcho-capitalists don't have to experience. The political cost of libertarianism for me was disengagement and disillusionment. I know that the US has a lot of problems. Our political system is flawed. It's not perfect. It is true that the average person doesn't have much of a voice and doesn't have much ability to influence things, especially on like a national level. And even so, I think that the ideology of libertarianism is quite fatalistic and cynical, and because you don't view the state as something with any legitimacy in a moral sense, you just view it as like thugs who happen to have the guns right now and they're pointing them around at everybody else, you really quickly get disengaged. And I mean, I personally, there were so many countless times, hundreds of times, I would just like laugh at the absurdity of something, and just be like feeling so utterly helpless and feeling so utterly hopeless that I could change anything, because the state is so powerful, it's so immense, it seeks to protect itself and preserve its own power, and there's just like no way to make it go anywhere. Another political cost of libertarianism is libertarians don't support positive rights. So in contrast to negative rights, which are the right not to be aggressed upon, positive rights are rights to something. So if you say healthcare is a human right, that's a positive rights claim. Education is a human right, positive right. To a libertarian, anything that requires the labor of another human being cannot be a human right. If it requires the labor of another human being and it's a human right, that means you have the right to demand it, and somebody else can be compelled to provide it. And all positive rights are therefore non-starters. You simply can't have positive rights. You can only have negative rights. You have a right not to be conscripted. You have a right not to be compelled to work against your will. You have a right not to be kidnapped or held against your will. As a result, even if some ballot initiative finds a way to pay for school lunches for all the kids in the district, because that'd be a really good thing for all the kids. Nobody has to worry about a child going hungry at school anymore. All libertarians, all principled libertarians, would vote against that. There's also the tragedy of the commons. From a libertarian standpoint, there's no point to having national parks, for example, because the point of the state, if there even is one, if there is even a single little ounce of legitimacy to the state, it would be to protect people's property rights and prevent people from killing each other. But the state shouldn't be in the business of education. The state shouldn't be in the business of regulating utilities or regulating healthcare. And it certainly shouldn't be in the business of owning land and setting up parks. And I, for one, really appreciate national parks. If national parks didn't exist, it's not like there would be an equal number of of parks that would be privately owned and be of equal quality. I find that really hard to believe in 2026. It seems like the people who have the power and the ability outside of government to buy land and preserve it and keep it like a public good, like lowercase p, public good, they're not doing that. They're like cutting down hundreds of acres of forest and building data centers. So I think that the libertarians get that one wrong. Even if in principle, this is probably the point of what I'm trying to convey. I think the libertarians do win in principle. I think libertarians win there. Where they lose is practicality, cohesion, things like that. So anyway, those are some of the political costs of libertarianism. Social costs of libertarianism. Libertarianism is extremely uncool. I've met other libertarians at like conferences and stuff, and when you're there with them, it feels like a breath of fresh air. It's like, finally, I'm here with some people who get it and who understand what I believe and why, and it's so nice to find birds of your own feather. But outside of that, in the regular world, libertarianism is not cool. It's not well respected. People really seem to hate it as an ideology, and I think they tend to respect you less as a person if you're a libertarian. I remember I was on a date one time with a girl, and it wasn't our first date. It was like our third or fourth or fifth date, and we wound up at a bookstore, and we were looking at novels, we were looking at foreign language books. We stumbled into, I guess, the economics section for some reason. There was a book by Hayek that I hadn't read. I think it was The Road to Serfdom. I'm like, oh yeah, I know Hayek. I know that name because of course I do. Why wouldn't I know who F.A. Hayek is? And she picks up the book and she looks at the back and she's silent for like 30 seconds. And then she looks up at me and she's like, are you a libertarian? And I'm like, yeah, that kind of accurately describes me. And I don't know if that was our last date or our second to last date, but I could just feel the contempt from her in that moment. She was a lovely girl, but it probably wouldn't have worked out for other reasons. I also met someone who I'm going to spend the rest of my life with, or hope to. So yeah, the social cost of being libertarian is high. And yeah, it's just, it limits some of your friendships and some of your relationships. I'm not saying, like, I think it would actually be pretty shitty of someone to take one small element of who you are, which is like the politics you happen to believe in, and like make that all of your worth as a partner, or like all of your dateability is just like this one little aspect of you, which, you know, it has nothing to do with like how you treat them and what you like to do for fun and what you do for work and the person you are. And because like at the end of the day, all this politics stuff, it rarely actually means anything practical. It's all like up here. It's all just aspirational. It's all just beliefs. Like, I believe XYZ, and then what? You vote once every 4 years? Like, to me, I don't know. But it does matter. At the same time, it does matter. It's this weird thing where it's all in your head and it's just a belief. It's just aspirational. Doesn't really root your identity, and yet people act like it does. It's a strange contradiction, and I think I just have to hold both of those apparently mutually exclusive truths. I just have to hold them both at the same time. My friends, bless their hearts, they've never disowned me. My close friends, at least, you know, they've never been like, dude, I can't believe you're a libertarian, like, you're such a fucking loser. Like, no, they haven't said that to me, but there's been some conversations about, like, it's just obvious neither side truly understands the other, and it just makes the friendship, it's just like, there's a little extra friction there that wouldn't otherwise be there. So those are some of the social costs of libertarianism. Okay, here come the personal costs. If you are not a libertarian and never have been, what happened in 2020 was probably weird and out of the blue and unexpected and crazy and really different. If you are a libertarian, what happened in 2020 was one of the biggest mass scale, probably the largest, in just terms of volume, the largest like human rights violation, collection of the most number of human rights violations, impositions on bodily autonomy, flagrant, bald-faced authoritarianism, a psychological warfare and propaganda operation, the likes of which humanity has never seen in history, and it's not even close. Like, it's by far, the COVID psyop was the biggest and most intense psychological operation ever conducted. The secondary and tertiary downstream effects of lockdowns and mask mandates and vaccine mandates are just unspeakably numerous and huge, and it's probably not even knowable. The human mind probably cannot comprehend how impactful those measures were and how much damage and just human suffering was caused by those. So, if that's what a libertarian thinks of COVID, how do you think I felt in March of 2020 and April of 2020 and June of 2020, all the way through, not just for months, but for years? I was fucking miserable. I was angry, I was pissed off, I was confused, I couldn't understand why all of this was allowed to happen. I was frustrated. I couldn't believe that this giant lie, this giant hoax was allowed to happen. And I'm just a regular guy. I think I was like 27 when COVID hit. That doesn't matter. But I couldn't get it. It really, really, really bothered me. And I wrote all sorts of essays. Most of them, thankfully, never got published. I made YouTube videos. I made podcast episodes. And I'm taking all of those down off the internet as we speak, because I am astounded by how angry, I'm shocked by how hateful and angry and absolutely miserable I was. And it was because I was a libertarian, and I simply was not able to cope with what I perceived as life-ending, life-altering levels of dystopian authoritarianism. And this is not a joke. I sincerely believed that by the end of 2022, I would be dead, because I would have been taken against my will to a camp for unvaccinated people. I seriously thought that the government not only was thinking about doing that, but was going to do it, and that they were going to round up all the unvaccinated people, and they wouldn't have to kill us. That, they could just put us in a camp, square mile of dirt with barbed wire around it, and just let us die. And of course, all those deaths would be to COVID, obviously. That's what I thought their plan was, and I'm sure I was a pretty fucking miserable prick to be around for those. I mean, I really didn't come out of that until 2023. Yeah, from like April of 2020 to sometime in 2023. I didn't have the ideas. The ideas had me. Let's just say that. So what has shifted for me? I don't think I'm a person who simply no longer values truth. I don't think I'm a person who doesn't value epistemology at all. I do think that there's a hierarchy of values, and my value of truth-seeking, my value of epistemology is now subordinated, and what's taken its place might be one value, might be a handful of values, but it's more like well-being as a value, just valuing well-being. So as a result, my politics are also well-being based. And I want to give special thanks to Britt Hartley from No Nonsense Spirituality. Britt, your videos are amazing. You've really helped me understand so much about being spiritual without being religious. And I think you've really unlocked some doors in my mind that were not only locked, but they were barricaded with like 20 tons of concrete for a really long time. And Britt has popularized this idea. Maybe she came up with it, I don't know, which is that religion is a cognitive technology. Religion is something that co-evolved with human beings since before history even began. And it is extremely functional and useful. And religion as a cognitive technology checks a lot of boxes in the human psyche, and it provides answers that we need in order to live meaningful lives. What exists, what the material realm, the spiritual realm, the earth, all the other planets, the stars, what is the world, what is the universe, and what is our place in it? Religion gives us identity. Religion gives us a sense of community. Religion gives us higher things to believe in, higher powers, God. And it also gives us virtues and morals to believe in. Religion gives us rituals. Religion gives us, religion is extremely useful. The point of saying all of that isn't to say that religion is true with a capital T. The point is to say that for most people, their well-being is way better and way higher when they're religious and when they believe that the world, the cosmos, has order, and they believe that who they are and their personal place in that world has meaning and makes some sense, and you sense your place in the world. Your well-being is simply better when you have a community of people to meet with. Your well-being is better when you can engage in rituals like prayer or communion or singing songs once a week with people. The alternative, which is not merely atheism, but atheism, I feel, as a 21st century person, really focuses on the truth claims and is like, all this religious stuff is wrong because of the truth claims. But what atheism can't provide, which religion does, is everything else. The identity, the cosmology, the morality, rituals, community, holidays, gods, myths. There are no atheist replacements for these things yet. And so for most people, their well-being is simply better with religion. For me, probably not, but the way my brain is wired, when I am religious, I become a fundamentalist. And that's exactly what happened to me from 2020 to 2023. And I already told you what was going on in my life, so there might be a connection there. So for me, I actually am better off not being religious and just being an agnostic atheist. But yeah, I lost the ritual, I lost the community, I lost God, I lost some of the cosmology. Yeah, that's true. So, closing statement, closing thought is that in the same way most people are better off religious, most people are better off believing in the state. And I'm one of them. My well-being is simply better when I believe that the government is inherently legitimate. For a long time, I was a political atheist. I didn't believe in the legitimacy of the state. I was an anarchist, and the reason I believed all that was because I was fixated solely on the truth claims. I believe that's why many present-day atheists are also atheists. They're focusing solely, or at least mostly, on the truth claims of Christianity, or Islam, or Judaism, or whatever, any religion, largely or entirely ignoring the well-being component. So for a long time, I was a political atheist and a spiritual theist. And now, in 2026, I'm a political theist, a statist, and I'm a spiritual atheist. And it feels weird to say all this. It really does, but the reason I'm at where I'm at, my hierarchy of values has shifted. And right now, well-being superordinates truthiness. And when applied to both of those columns, religion and politics, this is where I've arrived. I feel so much better. My experience of life is so much more hopeful and meaningful, and I honestly feel like I'm more of who I am when I prioritize well-being over truth claims. And for you, it might be different. Like, you might be better off being an anarchist for some reason. You might be better off, well, certainly, I just argued this, and so does Britt Hartley, you might be better off being religious than trying to be an atheist. If you know that in your soul, that your well-being is better when you believe in God and you go to church, go do that. I think that is good for you. I don't want you to be miserable. I don't want you to resort to the sort of fatalistic cynicism that I felt in the 2020s or early 2020s. And I think it's okay to prioritize well-being over epistemology. If you're playing the game of epistemology, I think libertarians can outmaneuver you. It's really hard to say, you don't have individual autonomy. You don't have a right to your own body. You don't have a right to your own labor. You don't have a right not to be compelled to do something against your will. That's a really hard thing to argue. So as long as you're playing the truth claim game, it's really hard to outmaneuver the libertarian ideology. But you don't have to play that game. You can just say, yeah, epistemology is important. It's good to be rigorous with truth claims. But even more important than that is well-being. And I feel like an idiot for coming to this kind of late at 33, because to many of you watching this might have been perfectly obvious to you when you were 13 that, like, of course, I'm just going to believe whatever I want the world to be, in the sense of, like, we have the tool to do it, which is the state. Here's how I want the world to be. We're just going to connect the two, right? That might be perfectly obvious to you from before you hit puberty. But for me, I'm either not wired that way, I wasn't raised that way. You know, there was a huge tower I had to deconstruct. That's where I'm at. So, thank you for listening.